Hello friends, welcome to Jinesh IAS Academy Editorial Analysis dated September 1, 2019. In this editorial analysis, we do three things. We link it to UPSC CSC syllabus, we understand the key points of editorial, and at the end, we also look at key concepts to learn, which are also very important from examination point of view. So let's begin today's editorial. Today's editorial has been taken from Business Nile newspaper, which has the title Is the Slowdown Cyclical or Structural, which directly links with UPSC Mains GS paper 3 under broad headings of monetary policy, banking sector and NBFCs, growth and development. Now here we have the question arises that is the slowdown cyclical or structural? It's both, but the worst is over. Monetary policy is accommodative, liquidity is in surplus and government spending will pick up. The slowdown is cyclic, aggravated by a focus on structural reform that neglected responding to a slowdown in industry and investment evident since 2011. There were structural features such as constraints in agriculture that kept food inflation high, but industry paid a disproportionate and unnecessary cost since real interest rates were raised to the highest ever historical levels to fight food inflation, for which their effectiveness was limited. In this, we have that how interest rate have major effect on inflation. In this diagram, we have three terms like interest rates, people, borrowing. Borrowing may be more or less. In general, as interest rates are lowered, more people are able to borrow more money. The result is that consumers have more money to spend, causing the economy to grow and inflation to increase. The opposite holds true for rising interest rates. With less spending, the economy slows and the deflation decreases. The financial sector and foreign investors favored the conservative monetarist stance because they value macroeconomic stability, but perhaps they did not realize that excessive tightening also creates risk in Indian conditions. Growth that was lower than potential for almost a decade hurt investors a lot also. Despite the noise about deficits and inflation, research shows that the country ratings are most strongly associated with per capita output, which depends on growth. Now, what is the chemistry between monetary policy and inflation? Every time it is not outstanding, it has some targets. Under this, easy money policy is needed to increase economic activity during slowdown. This is done by keeping the interest rates low. Thus, RBI needs to balance inflation, targeting and accelerated economic growth. Like for an example, we can take that today current inflation rate is 3%, which slowdown in the economy, and GDP growth was at 6-year low of 5% in the April-June 2019 quarter, as the inflation targeting cannot ensure stability in the economy. As another example, financial crisis situations like IL and FS default and the NPA non-performing assets, crisis in the banking industry. Inflation in India have substantial rise like real policy rate. This has been accompanied by declining borrowing in the formal sector, likely affecting investment and thereby growth. Inflation targeted policy cannot ensure enough employment creation in the country. Like for an example, we can take the inflation in India have the exogenous shock which led to global oil prices, weaker rupee and poor monsoon. Even though current inflation rates are stable, unemployment in India has been the highest in the last 45 years as per NSSO data. There is a conflict of interest in the RBI managing the monetary policy and selling bonds for the government, which require keeping interest rates low and thus is inflationary. Global financial crisis of 2008 showed that the monetary policy defined by inflation targeting can no longer be treated as the centerpiece of macroeconomic policy. Thus, RBI need to follow a pragmatic monetary policy, and its current policy that largely focuses on inflation targeting must be reviewed. As real appreciation and high interest rates damaged domestic industry, the economy's import dependence increased. As oil import dependence set a floor to rupee depreciation, stimulating domestic demand and reducing supply costs to maintain the Indian industries, export competitiveness is particularly important. Now, a very important topic of discussion is tight liquidity. High real interest aggravated and sustained NPAs. Highly leveraged firms find it difficult to repay, more so if earnings fall since demand is kept low. An asset quality review cannot help when assets keep deteriorating. The decision to keep durable liquidity in deficit since 2011 aggravated matters. The deficit often became too large since the Indian economy is subject to large liquidity shocks. For example, from movements in foreign capital, cash leakages are higher in tight liquidity conditions. Short-term liquidity available in the LAF was not an adequate substitute. Moreover, government spending in the second half of 2018-19 was lowered by about 2% of the GDP in order to meet the fiscal deficit targets. This government tends to front load spending and to spend more in the first half of a fiscal year. Private investment also slowed, partly due to pre-election uncertainty, while the global slowdown affected exports. Falling incomes as well as credit slowed consumption. Now, change in the monetary policy, is it good? Yeah, of course. That good news is that these conditions are changing. Monetary policy has finally become accommodative. Liquidity is in surplus. Many schemes are making it easier for NBFCs to get the liquidity. And there are signs the government is front loading spending again since July. The transfer from the RBI is only 0.75 of the GDP, but can help jumpstart planned spending through a rise in the money supply, without forcing the government to borrow ahead of revenues and thus raise government security interest rates. The Finance Commission may relax the FRBM to enable the counter-cyclical spending. Privatization can transform government assets into infrastructure, which has more spillovers. For the first time after the global financial crisis, monetary policy is loosening to counter an external shock, and the exchange rate has depreciated to the competitive levels. The festive season should see some cheer. If real interest rates come down, the drag on demand in place since 2011 would dissipate. Now we have another very important topic through examination point of view. 15th Finance Commission, also known as FC, the constitutional body under Article 280, created every 5 years to recommend the transfer of financial resources from the center to the state. The Commission also decides the principle on which grants and aid will be given to the state. The 15th FC, November 27, 2017, and is headed by Mr. N.K. Singh. The recommendations to be observed for a period of 5 years will kick in April 1, 2020. We have another segment of this is this State Finance Commission, SFCs. The State Finance Commission, 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments to rationalize and systemize state, sub-state level fiscal relation in India. Article 243I of the Constitution mandated that state governor to constitute a finance commission every 5 years. Article 243Y of the Constitution states that the Finance Commission constituted under Article 243I shall also review the financial position of the municipalities and make recommendations to the governor. The reversal in macroeconomic tightening is sustainable because of the softening of three key structural constraints. Number one is the surplus in agricultural. A surplus in agriculture, together with soft global prices, will keep food inflation low. Number two, global oil markets. The changing dynamics of global oil markets is likely to keep oil prices and India's import bill manageable. Number three is bankruptcy code. A functioning bankruptcy code so that the promoters cannot pass all their losses to the taxpayers makes fuller recapitalization of banks possible. The robustness of regulation and corporate governance has steadily improved. Bankers also have greater safeguards against arbitrary prosecution. Banks have recovered some money, NPAs have bottomed out, and credit growth shows sign of picking up. Now, at the last calculated reform, the traditional reform lobby sees land reform as necessary for growth to revive. Those are the structural constraints they highlight, but structural reform cannot reverse the growth slowdown. Since it has long delivery legs and short run cost, reforms are required to bring down cost of doing business and improve productivity. But they need to be done continuously and unobtrusively, not as big bang that creates resistance and spends political capital. The focus has to be on feasible, least cost reforms that deliver fast. The economic survey asks for a big bang rise in investment using foreign triggers, but these are scarce in a global slowdown. They may not be irrepressible. However, small changes in the right direction can accumulate to the tip economy to a higher growth path. An investment GDP ratio of 32 is not very low if the propensity to spend rises marginally above that to save. It can raise growth, jobs, incomes, taxes and savings as in past Indian high growth cycles. For that, credit has to rise and the financial system has to deliver safely. As the government improves the supply side, monetary policy has to be stimulated demand. Thank you.